This demo is going to take a fairly deep dive into the template editor, which is the draft project model. And everything that I'm showing you is going to be happening in the templates tab. Because the template editor is a core user only function, what I'm showing you is going to be a set of tools and capabilities that are only available to core users. Templates provide the foundation for bulletproof generation of contracts on Outlaw. The process of creating templates includes adding text as well as dynamic fields, which we'll get into. And also there are some setting configurations at the template level that affect deal flow on the front end. So there are some choices that are made at the template level that can impact some of your deal flow options when you're doing deals on Outlaw. And I'm going to demonstrate uploading from a .docx. So now I'm in the template editor, and this is where those dynamic templates are created. There's a few aspects to creating kind of a full service template on Outlaw. So I would broadly say that static text, which is the kind of dark gray text that we see here, and each of these sections separated by paragraphs are kind of independent, which allows us to do some key advanced tasks such as create conditional content, move things around in a way that's really seamless and maintains numbering sequences. So there's moving the text around to ensure that it kind of looks the way you want it to and has all the text that you need, which involves using the arrows to move sections up or down as needed, toggle numbering on and off as needed. Now notice that when I toggle that numbering on, this numbered list automatically renumbers. If I toggle numbering off, it will also renumber. I can also indent and outdent sections. So a numbered section as 1 having a next numbered section of 2, I can indent this numbered section and it will become a subsection. Pressing enter to drop the line and create a new section will continue the numbering sequence I've established. But if I am done with section 1 and want to move on to section 2, I can. So I've got section 2 down here for now, but if I move this out, this will become section 2, this will renumber as section 3. So we've got the ability to create subsections and then to indent and outdent as needed. If I move this section up, everything will renumber, but of course I'll have to retype that. So that's kind of getting your just sectioning in place. You're just going to want to use the icons for up arrow, down arrow, and indent and outdent to achieve the numbering sequence that you want. If you want a different style for a list level, list levels are the numbering sequences for each level of indentation. So right now my list style includes list level 1, which is the most major section, is a numeral 1, 2, 3, 4 within parentheses. Let's say that I want to change that to be a numeral with a period. I can set a different list level style. And let's say that instead of subsections being A, B, C, D, and so on, I would like the style for the second list level, which is one level of indentation in, to be set 1.1 or 1.2. And so I use numbering for that as well. And then my entire list level 2 changes. Now what if we were to create an even further indented section? It'll apply the default, which is the small Roman numeral in parentheses, and then again I can change that. So lots to explore there, lots of ways to kind of customize the look and feel there. Now I want to talk about how to set up the dynamic fields that are going to become They're going to serve a couple purposes during the deal process. One is they'll become click-to-fill fields. So while you're doing a deal process, if you want to have fields that you can simply click on to fill in information for pieces of data that change from deal process to deal process, you'll create what we call variables for those pieces of information. These are also the fields that are capturing data from your deal process. So they're doing kind of both of those tasks. So you may want to create variables so that there are click-to-fill fields for easy drafting of your contracts. You may also want to create variables for the purposes of capturing key points of data. First, I'm going to remove some of these additional sections that I've created. So already you can see that the pieces of information that have blanks are being highlighted in yellow. That's the platform guessing based on the source document, the Word document that I used to upload this from, guessing that there are probably some variable fields here because there are brackets with nothing inside of them. So I'm going to show you how to create a few dynamic fields, how to format them, and how that looks in a contract generated from this template. So this agreement is made on. Clearly we are looking for a date here. I can create a new variable here, such as agreement date. And because it is a date, I'm going to format it as a date. And that is all that is needed to create a dynamic field. Now, what does that mean? What does that look like when I'm doing a deal? I'm going to use the preview function to demonstrate what is happening in a contract generated from this template. So as you can see on this first line, I have a dynamic field that's ready to register a date value. It is dynamic, so I can change it. Okay, looking good so far. So in this next portion, I'm looking to add dynamic fields to represent placeholders for the entities that are entering into this agreement. So these are going to be a different kind of dynamic field that we call a party. So what we just created was a variable, and we're about to create a party. So I'm going to, and I see that these the parties in this agreement, the contract itself refers to these parties as party 1 and party 2. Now, this is pretty generic. Many contracts will refer to, they'll give more of a descriptor to their parties, such as company and vendor, employer, employee. You've probably seen a lot of examples of these. In this agreement, they're just referred to as party 1 and party 2. Okay, so now we've got our two parties named in this agreement, and notice that as I'm creating these dynamic fields, they are appearing at the top here. What that is allowing us to do is A, just to know the fields that exist in the template, and B, it's giving us a quick add feature where we can create another copy or embed another instance of this same variable in the template elsewhere. So for instance, if I had another section in the contract that referenced the agreement date, I could simply add that here by placing my cursor wherever I want that element to appear and tapping it, and now it's added. And these, because they are the same variable, these instances are linked and they are identical, which means that when this information is filled in up here, it's going to populate down here as well and vice versa. So let's check that additional functionality in our preview function. So I've got an agreement date here and an agreement date here. They are exactly the same copies of the same variable. So they should autofill simultaneously together. Great, we see that happens. Should I update one of them? The same should be the case. There we go. And we also have our parties embedded there as well. Now, as we're looking at the parties, when I click on this to fill in this information, it's going to reveal not one, but numerous fields. And that's because party elements are a special type of variable that contain some sub-properties. So when I created party 1 as a party in this contract or in this template, there are 6 subfields that I can kind of format each instance of the variable as. So if I fill in all this information, and I'm going to use a shortcut, this is me, that's going to fill in all of my information from my profile. If I fill in all of this information it's asking for, the piece of information that it's going to pull out, again, clicking on this, I've stored all this information, my name, my email, my company, my title, address, and phone number. It's going to pluck out just the company name in a shortened form, minus any Inc. or LLC. So that's the default. Same for party 2. It's going to pull out the piece of information in this third box, which is the company name minus LLC. So again, that is the default display. Now we are going to how to format this to pull out the full company name. So we want to include Inc. and LLC, as well as it looks like we're going to add the address of the party as well, which we know is one of the sub-properties here for these party elements. So we're going to embed a second copy of this element and format it as an address. So let's take a stab at doing some formatting for these party elements. The great thing about this is that, remember, you're only doing this once. I'm setting up this template and there's a little bit of, technical specificity to it, but I'm setting this up once, I'm setting it up right, so I never have to set it up again, and then my workflows and my contracts are going to be super easy and optimized. So to format the party element that I've already created and embedded in the text, I simply tap on it. I'm going to change from the default display to the legal name display, which will display the party's full organizational name or the full name of the signer if the signer is an individual. In this case, it's not. This is going to be Outlaw and Hogwarts. Now this instance of the party 1 element is formatted as .legalName. Let's do the same for party 2. Now I want to add my addresses. So I'm going to add another copy of the party 1 element here, because I want to create a placeholder for the address of party 1. And this one I'll format as an address because this is where I want the address information to show up. Now let's do the same for party 2. Second instance of the element. Tap to format it and choose address. And while I'm at it, let's do company number. Now, company number is not one of the sub-properties of a party element, so that means that we're just going to want to create a normal variable, just like we did for agreement date. This might be a number. You could choose number for this. I would keep it as text just because then, as I'm setting this up, I'm not maybe sure. Some company numbers may have dashes or letters in them. So I'm just going to keep it inclusive as a text field. Now I have to create a company number for party 2. If I use the same variable as we've seen before, those would be linked, and we don't want those to be a copy of the same variable, because we're going to have party 1 is going to have a distinct company number from party 2. So if I had been thinking ahead, maybe I would have called that first one company number 1 or something. But I'm just going to go ahead and call this company number 2. Now the variable ID, which is this first box, that needs to be different. So that's why I called that first one company number and this one company number 2. But the display name, registered company number, that can be identical across variables. So that's no problem. I can leave that as long as the variable ID is unique. All right, let's go back to the preview and check all this behavior that we've created in here. So same as last time, I'm using this as me to populate all of this information. And because of the formatting I've done, once I press save, we should show Outlaw's full company name in the first field, and then the address in the proper field. So let's see if that works out. Yep, Outlaw Inc., registered office at 123 Brooklyn Avenue. Perfect. I'll add in the company number. It might be that in a deal process, you would like for the counterparty to fill in their company number. You may not know they add information, and it is possible to assign variables to the counterparty without giving them broader editing access. So there's a granularity to user permissions that will allow you to provide the opposite side of the deal the access they need to complete the information that they need to fill in without giving them too much access that you don't want them to have. So far we've covered, just to review a bit, we have covered how to move text around, both in terms of up and down, numbering, toggled on and off, indented and outdented. We've covered how to create a variable field, which holds space for information that will become click to fill in a contract and will be capturing data. We've seen a couple different formats of variables that can include dates and open text fields as well as numbers. We've seen creation of a special type of dynamic field called a party that will allow you to collect information about the entities entering into the agreement. Now, as we scroll through the document, there is, we can see that there's a few blanks that looks like we've got two different options, its or theirs. And in this section termination, there's an option between it should read all obligations contained in this agreement will continue in full force and effect for a period of blank years from the date of either this agreement or receipt of all the relevant information, confidential information. So this is a great example of some other really helpful variable types that we can set up in Outlaw. First, let's just do the number. I'm calling this termination period Now it's going to be in a number of years, so I'm going to add some placeholder text that gives the person filling out the contract some helpful information. I'll format this as a number. And so here what we want is not just an open text field, but actually a drop-down menu. We want to give the person filling out this contract the ability to choose between two different options. So I'm going to copy this text from the date of, this is where we want our variable. The format that I'm going to choose is called list. And what this is going to do is form a drop-down menu. So it says enter options 1 per line. My two options are this agreement or receipt of the relevant item of confidential information. Now it appears just like any other variable called termination options, but we can use the preview function to check the behavior. And so we're presented with a drop-down menu with our two different options. 3 years from the date of this agreement, or 3 years from the receipt of the relevant item of confidential information. So the last thing, I'm not going to go through and create every variable and element in here. You can kind of see how it works. You just continue on with the process of adding variables, checking the behavior as you go, and hopefully setting up everything that you need to do. The final component here is the creation or insertion of a signature field. So when you upload a document, it's probably going to have a bunch of lines from your Word document of where it would be signed and so on and so forth. It's much simpler in Outlaw. So I'm going to get rid of all of this. There is a native e-signature feature in Outlaw for super quick and easy signing. And I'm going to, this is the text that should appear over the signature field, signed by or on behalf of parties. And I'm just going to turn this into a signature field. And that's it. That is how easy it is to create a signature field in the template editor. Now, it's pulling from the fact that it already knows that we've got two parties, one called party 1 and party 2. If I had not created these elements prior to adding the signature field, I would have added essentially a blank signature field, so they are dynamically connected. So once you've created one or more party elements in your template, your signature field is good to go. Once again, checking that in the preview feature, here's what the signature field looks like when the information for the parties hasn't been filled in. Right now, the system doesn't know, it knows that there's going to be a party 1 and a party 2, but it doesn't know anything about those signers. But if we were to fill in this information as we would when doing a contract, this information appears in our signature field. First, naming the corporate entity, and then the name of the signer, followed by their position title. And this isn't visible in the preview function, but the signatures are date and time stamped. So as you can see, there's an option here, show date stamps on signatures. So the signing is also recorded. When signatures are affixed, they will be date and time stamped. So that is all you need for really the most basic template creation. You need your text, which can be uploaded from a Word document. We didn't show this, but you can also paste it in. So you could just start from blank and paste in text. Of course, you can draft natively. You could type an entirely new template in here, but most people upload starting from Word document. So you need your text, you need your dynamic fields, which we've created, and you need your signature field. And with this in place, we have kind of the most basic bare bones of a template. Now there's other things that we could add. For instance, there's a lot of functionality, and we're not going to go over all of it in this walkthrough, but for instance, we can add an appendix. So we know that there are schedules and exhibits and such. I can add that. And what that'll allow you to do is just start back over with a new numbering sequence, and in any kind of exports of this document to Word or PDF, you would get a page break between any body content and appendix content. So all of that is supported. Now, the last feature, a couple last features that I want to highlight are conditional content and auto signing. So let's look at auto signing first. So we've seen already in the preview function how when information for the parties entering the agreement is filled in, that populates the signature field. And that's very useful, particularly when one of these parties is always going to be the same, going to be populated by your signer. It makes a lot of sense to add the person from your team who will be signing these agreements on 100% of the time or most of the time at the template level. That way you never have to fill in their information. It's just already present. So let's do that. Here's the settings for the template. I'm going to go to users, and I am going to set it so that my colleague Charlotte is always the signer on these agreements. Our party is party 1. Now that's set. And when I use the preview function to create the new contract, or to show what a new contract would look like, we'll see that unlike our previous examples in the preview, now Charlotte's information will actually be present already. There we go. There's Outlaw. And there's Charlotte. So that is a great time saver and error reducer for you, for your team to already have the signer included at the template level. And it's worth mentioning that it's not just signers who you can add automatically. You can add other people from your team at the template level to ensure that all the contracts that are generated from this template are shared with those particular individuals. And that is including granular user permissions. So I could have one of my colleagues who just needs to be able to view contracts added as just a viewer. I could have a different colleague who always provides a supervisory role added as an editor. So there's a lot of functionality there, a lot of granularity there. I won't go into all of it, but auto signing, very powerful capability. So the very last thing that we're going to touch on in this demo is conditional content. Because conditionality is a very powerful feature that allows you to streamline your template library. And by that, I mean that frequently people will have a large number of Word documents or Google documents or however they're storing their agreements that are essentially similar to one another and only have a few differences. Perhaps you have a mutual NDA and a unilateral NDA, and 95% of the text is the same. You just have a couple of word differences or a section or two that differs. Another example is that frequently companies will have a different version of an agreement for a certain jurisdiction, or version of a contract for domestic sales versus international sales. And quite frequently, not always, but quite frequently, the differences between those templates is actually fairly small. And it is only because of the kind of flat and undynamic nature of Microsoft Word that you have to have entirely separate documents for those. So people will come in thinking that they have, 10 different templates, when really, using conditional content and Outlaw, they can actually streamline that down to just 3 or 4. So what does this look like in practice? In practice, this looks like setting particular content to appear or not appear based on a selection that the person filling out the contract makes. And that is set up at the template level and then completed at the contract level. So I'm going to demonstrate this. We know that all obligations contained in this agreement will continue in full force and effect for a period of 3 years or X years from the date of, and then we have a choice. Some, as we know, are going to have a response that is 3 years from the date of the agreement, and some is upon receipt of the relevant item of confidential information. Now, what if there was additional contractual language that related to one or other of those options? So let's say that there are special terms for yada. So just as an example, let's imagine that what we currently have as section 7.1, that text only needed to appear in the event that that this particular contract, or a particular contract, was being terminated X number of years from the date of the agreement. What we can do is attach a condition to this content so that it only shows up in that event. And the setting of the condition is determined by the response to one of those list variables. So we set up the termination options as this agreement or a receipt of relevant confidential information. And I only want this section that I have selected right now to show up if they choose this agreement. And actually, let's give some. See, there's a lot more content if they choose the second option. I'm attaching my condition, this time choosing the other option. So right now there's no subsections. You don't see any 7.1 or 7.2. But once I choose one option, I'll get the content I set as conditional. And if I change it to the other option, I'll get the other content. And as you can see, all the renumbering is bulletproof. So there are a lot of use cases for conditional content, some of which I've already talked about. If you have different jurisdictions, if you have different language that isn't that's fairly similar across the agreement, but not completely, then there are other use cases for conditional content, which include almost kind of having a clause library where you add a bunch of different clauses that are only relevant, and you can kind of just set it up so that you're essentially picking them off of a menu and triggering those. You can kind of think of it as ordering a la carte is one of the things that conditionals will allow you to do if you're preparing an amendment, for instance, and you have a number of different amendments, for a number of different scenarios in your sales process, and you can just have those trigger on and off. And there's also a way to trigger them on and off kind of behind the curtain, so to speak, so that you don't actually have to have a field in the text of the agreement. That's getting into some kind content that we can talk about during account setup in the onboarding process. But the conditional setup is very powerful, and as you can see, very easy to do. Simply name your variable, name your condition, and that is all that it takes. And the greatest thing about this is that it's a simple, easy to learn system, and anyone can do it. You don't need to know how to code. So it's all very accessible to you. And the last thing I'll just mention is that we do have the overview feature, which can be prepared as a unique and optional feature, which will allow you to create a cover letter or a term sheet for your agreement. And if you would like if you're interested in more information about that, you can, of course, reach out to your to your sales executive or to customer success, and we'd be happy to fill you in more about the power of overviews. As you can see, my template is stored in my template library. It is currently in draft form. If I would like to set it to active, that will allow me to start generating contracts from it. So I've got a full service template ready to go, and I can start generating mutual confidentiality agreements anytime I like. I hope this demo has been helpful for you and that you'll be in touch about your interest in learning more about our product.